everybody. David Donaldson here, along with Joe Martin. Joe, happy St. Patrick's Day.
This is an amazing day to be on this with your Masters green on after the players got delayed because that massive rainstorm that came on and just knocked out all kinds of airplanes. So I'm really happy to be on St. Patrick's Day recording this episode with you, Dave. That's for sure. And I will tell everybody for disclaimer, there's been no green beer or Guinness drank before this podcast.
That's true.
Can't be held liable for anything we say because we're not intoxicated or inebriated from those Irish functions.
That is correct. I have not left the house today. I just worked from the office today. There's no green beer, although I have two little leprechauns running around the house. That's fair. You got your own hand brewed of leprechauns running around. I don't know if there was any green pea left in the toilets this weekend, but it wasn't for me.
Well, we're going to get luck of the Irish on this episode. So, oh man, this is going to be a good episode. I'm excited about this one for this topic, Dave. So it's been a good one that you brought up, and excited to talk to our crew about.
I thought we needed to kind of talk about. So KW went through not a merger, but a partnership this week, right? It got announced that Keller Williams and Gary, right, they partnered up with Stone Point. Okay, Stone Point is different than some of the partnerships that they're a venture capital company, right? They own or heavily invest in hundreds of companies, right? And two of them stand out to me when I started to really look at who they were, right? And who Chris, the new CEO coming in, Chris, his background through REITs and commercial real estate, but more importantly, Stone Point heavily invested in CoreLogic, which owns about 75% of the MLSs, okay? A lot of it, I'm familiar with them from Matrix being out in Arizona, okay? Although they don't own Bright, okay? And they own Lone Wolf. And for those of you that write digital contracts or familiar with zip forms, Lone Wolf owns zip forms. So that was a very telling thing for me. And I thought it was important to kind of rehash a little bit of the timeline to look at, hey, what has KW done and why does a venture capital, right, technologically advanced partnership mean for us potentially going forward? So, Joe, I've been with KW going back to 2009. Okay, and around 2010, 2009, they launched what was called E-Edge, right? It was a market leader product. Okay, it was database, it was website, it was marketing, it was flyers. For its time, right, was advanced and a good product for a CRM marketing platform. Well, like any good things over time, if it's good, others are interested. Well, being the largest real estate company in the world, we always have people's interest, right? So not long after Market Leaders Partnership, they were acquired by a company called Zillow. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they have shown a propensity to buy companies that KW has strategically been in partnership with. Am I striking a chord there?
I find it funny. So there you go. We're on the front end.
So that was Market Leader. And then what happened, okay, was that Market Leader was not performing. It wasn't advancing. It wasn't making improvements. It wasn't doing changes. And it started to die on the vine. So fast forward a little bit. We were in partnership with a company called DotLoop. DotLoop was a digital contracts, cloud-based platform, electronic signatures, very similar to DocuSign. And they were very strong. I had met the owner. They're out of Cincinnati. I was a certified instructor for them, Hunter, and some of the people out there. And as you would have it, and I think you might find this, coincidental, a company called Zillow purchased DotLoop. I didn't know if you had heard that.
Oh, we heard it. That's why I think the strategic shift over to DocuSign happened. If I'm not right.
Exactly right. So there was an upheaval and a very quick shift from DotLoop to DocuSign. Now, during all these times, KW even used to be involved in a thing called Project Upstream. I don't know if you remember Project Upstream. Project Upstream was spearheaded by Keller Williams and the other larger brokers, but KW was at the spear of this. and I think even Wendy Harrelson was heavily involved with this when this was going down. They were trying to figure out and negotiate with NAR, how do we get our rights back with our listings online? Essentially, how Zillow had built their business, right?
Yep.
They said they come to the business, they're friends of the agent, they will sell you your listing leads back to you at a fee, right? And they kept getting bigger and bigger, and under the guise that they're here to help. And agents were more than happy to pay them hand over foot because they were good at what they did, which was lead generation and follow-up and things that agents weren't structurally sound at, right, to harvest online leads. They fit a need. And they had an opportunity through NAR to get direct feeds. And that ultimately quashed, right, Project Upstream, which is the agent's or the consumer's ability to take some of that power back. They can do some of that now through contracts, but it's become so standard, it's hard to even have a conversation about what Zillow actually is versus what the consumer's perceived notion of them are. So while all that is happening, we all of a sudden hear at post the DotLoop change, right? That Keller Williams is going to be partnering or building a platform called Command. Now, I don't know exactly when this all came to play, but I know in 17 or 18 is when I really first started hearing about going down the path. We are building our own platform. And I think it was at Family Reunion 2018 where Gary famously came out and said, we're now a technology company, which people ridiculed, understandably so. But understanding that he was trying to do that to say, hey, we have to change. We've got to attract different types of talent. We want to build a platform that's for us. So with that, I kind of, before we go any further, I just want to summarize that for the agents, say, hey, Gary made a strategic decision with his team, right, to go all in and spend millions, right, to say, we're going to build our own platform. Maybe a folly, but here we are now, right, 10 years later almost, one of three companies that actually have their own technology at this point. Everybody else has to use third-party platforms. And the reason I give him a lot of credit, and I'm not going to throw them under the bus, even though it's not been the easiest thing to do, and it's had its fair share of challenges, is that he did it for the agents and the consumer, right? That's what I think people miss through all of this, is that the reason Zillow was buying all these companies and subsequently became brokerage in so many states and subsequently bought ShowingTime, which finally created an uproar industry. That was the domino that created the uproar, right? Them buying ShowingTime. But what were they doing? They were buying data sets, databases, largest real estate company in the world's database. DotLoop, one of the top two companies in the world that processes electronic signatures for transactional management. ShowingTime, all the access points to people looking at to buy and sell and at what price points, how many times they're visiting a property, how many people are on the market at any particular time, just gobs and gobs of data. Hence, venture capital pouring into our industry in the late teens and early 20s. It pains me to say teens and 20s and not think of the 1919.
Yeah, I knew you were going with that one. Yeah,
that's just painful, but that was just hard. So all of a sudden, people are aware. And then they see, okay, there's this influx of money and newness to technology. So while KW's building tech, not always the flashiest of tech, side by side does a bunch. But before you even get there, think of everything I just unpacked that said took about 10 years or less of tremendous upheaval, with a lot of it pointed at the largest real estate company in the world. Do you think people understand that took place or was taking place, or that truly changed the marketplace?
Well, I think what's interesting about all the facts that you're bringing up for the timeline, I think it's actually really, really powerful to see the timeline of those events, because it's a slowly then suddenly type of thing. These acquisitions, these repositioning of companies, these acquisitions or private equity infusion of cash, they're all a series of events that lead up to something. I think what's interesting is if you look at our industry, it hasn't really been disrupted since probably the 80s, when you had Remax, Realty Execs, and KW come to market to really change up the brokerage. So you brought up a lot of tech. And I think
Mhm.
everybody listening, it's also important to understand the timeline of like brokerage changes. And you've had a traditional model for a number of years. 1980s hit. Realty execs come, give a lot of power to the agent. Economics change. Remax comes. KW comes. You get to a capped model where a lot more of the income is going to the agent. The agent becomes the center of the transaction. And then over the past like 2010, same time that you're talking about these tech things happening in 2010 to 2020, you also had a virtual brokerages come to the table. You've always had discount brokers for transaction models. You never had like a virtual model, right? And these virtual models have gained steam for a lot of reasons, just another evolution of the brokerage. But what I see happening, which I think is what you're getting at, is that you've had this technology evolution that's focused on data. And on the brokerage side, you still have data. You've had these evolution of the brokerages. And it's very clear that technology is coming to innovate on the brokerage business, right? And what's fascinating to me is it's all about consumer, and you're looking at brokerage data, you're looking at all those other things that clients utilize for data. And at the end of the day, any company that's coming to buy, say, a tech stack is coming for direct to consumer data. Anyone that's coming at the brokerage side is trying to figure out how do you get the consumer data. And they're kind of like, now what I see is like when you look at industries, and I think this is the crucial part of our industry, is that when you have boom and bust cycles, what happens is you have a boom, there's a lot of expansion in it. And what happens is you see growth, and at some point that growth plateaus or has some like comeback, like what we saw in 2023. And then when that comeback happens, that's where you see a lot of consolidation, because the boom of it, there's a lot of fat, right? And that fat gets overseen because there's so much volume creation, there's so many transactions going on, everybody's making money. But once there's some type of economic change and industry changes, you see margins thin, and that's usually where you see the disruption happen. That's where you're seeing the like consolidation of things. Like what we just saw, and I think Dave's going to get into this, is that the fact that Redfin gets acquired by Rocket, right? And that App Properties had gotten acquired by Compass. And then obviously someone let the cat out of the bag beforehand around Compass and Berkshire. And obviously now I don't know what's going on there, to be determined in a future episode.
Was it Berkshire or Washington Fine?
Well, Washington Fine got bought by Compass as well. They got acquired by Compass in the local DC market. App Properties was more national because they did
Right.
have locations besides just Chicago. We saw Compass come in and buy some boutique brokerages. They also then had some leakage around, Berkshire. And then you had Redfin that has a tech stack, and they've got a different brokerage model, which is, W-2 type agents. But Rocket's got all this money, but they're trying to figure a way, how does Rocket get closer to the consumer? And it's always been clear in our industry that the agent has the closest relationship to the consumer. So They see a ton of value in a brokerage that has a tech platform being Redfin, because you're either looking at the Z word for home search or you're looking at Redfin is typically where the consumers are going. So you see this consolidation because what's happening now is the boom has turned into a consolidation, or you call it bust, if you will. I don't think it's a bust. It's just
Right.
6 million transactions down to 4. Like you have a consolidation. And now in those consolidations is where you're seeing all the mergers happen, because anybody that's worth their weight in our real estate industry has seen that at some point merger and acquisition is going to happen because the margin isn't there anymore. And you're either going to go bankrupt or you're going to get gobbled up by someone that has market share. And I think you're seeing that on the brokerage side right now. And you're also bringing up the tech stuff. And I'm going to let Dave, because you spend way more time than I do in regards to the CoreLogic, the Lone Wolf, and then you take KW, which is the largest agent count by franchise for a franchise brand, and you take the data that Stone Point has as a PE, and then you marry that with one of the largest franchise networks and already having a tech stack that is Command, that's owned and operated by KW. And I think it's a massive positioning. I think it's a massive partnership that if I'm in any other brokerage relationship, I'd be scared of, because that's massive data to the consumer, which is only going to empower a lot of the agents in KW.
Yeah, you're spot on, right? So then I look at that, and then I look at the turn, like the 1919 2020 turn, right? So we had Carl Liebert was CEO at the time, and he brought in a gentleman named Chris Cox, who's still with us. And the reason I thought this was amazing at the time was, Joe, when I was using Moleps, I can give you a quick summary. When I moved from Arizona to Virginia in 2012, whenever I would deposit a commission check, the banking company that I used was actually not in Virginia. So I had to mail checks out, right, to get deposited because there was no bank here. And they did have an app, and it was the early renditions of bank deposits. I don't know if you remember, but they were capped usually at like $2,000 when this first started to happen. Well, fortunately, Northern Virginia compensation at the time was a little higher than that, right, and still is. So I always had to mail my checks out to get deposited. I couldn't deposit them on the app, but when I was able to deposit things on apps, they did work very well. My financial institution apps, and when I think back to the early versions of business applications, not just the fun stuff, but the actual business apps that I would use were usually based around the financial industry. So Chris Cox came from that world, right, working with Wells Fargo and on the mobile application side of development. And I thought that was incredibly strategic for KW to bring that in, because where we are now with command and mobile and the consumer, right, we're now having that fight, right? If Zillow came out for us and Redfin, right, we're not going after that market share because we have the relationship and we now have an application front to combat with that. Now, you're talking about going after a known entity where people think of Zillow almost as like they think of like Xerox was for copiers. And that's just fact-based when you're thinking of online search for homes. So it's something that we're battling. However, what we have that Zillow doesn't, and Zillow will never have, even if they have data, they don't have the relationships with the consumers that our agents have. I hope you guys all recognize that are listening at home. They don't have what you have. That's the fight. So what KW is allowing you to do is leverage technology that's not third-party proprietary. It's private. It's KW only, the only company that has it, right? And nobody has access to your data but you, right? And if you get your consumers now centralized with a power of home, which we've been talking about for over a year now, right? To be home managers, to be involved with the process, because you already are, right? It's a rebranding of your mindset about how you're communicating and talking and what you're giving your consumers. The mobile app is that portal to their home management platform that you, the real estate agent, has. We had the talent, we had money, we didn't have deep pockets. We're a debt-free company, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. I mean, to be a debt-free organization, right, that just doesn't exist. At the same time, debt is powerful and allows you to buy things. So we couldn't go head-to-head. Everybody would be like, oh, why didn't KW buy this? Or why didn't KW buy that? Well, we're not a publicly funded company. We don't sell stocks, right? And there's a board and there's money, but it only goes so far. That's where this changes the game in my eyes. Now, don't know what the partnership actually is, but it's big enough, right? That it's big enough to make a significant impact in the industry, as to now that KW is no longer just the largest real estate company in the world that has an incredible tech stack. They now have a strategic partnership with the coffers to compete with the venture capitalists that are trying to create upheaval for the wrong reasons. Now we have the capital to do things for the right reasons. And that's what I am so excited about for this strategic partnership. Because as you mentioned, core logic, right? That's data that we can now tap into, but apply it for the good, right? What does that mean about our consumers and our home buyers, and putting our agents at the front of knowledge about market shifts in industry that isn't influenced by outside noise, right? Contracts, right? We use DocuSign. They're great, but now if we're in bed with a company named Lone Wolf, that plugs into Zip Forms, plugs into DocuSign too. So it's just a seamless another trend and flow that I think will just provide dividends to our company. And I can't even talk to all the other companies that they're a partnership with because I just don't know enough yet. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, I think like And all of this, like, we're not going to really know until it like plays out, right? So everybody looking for like, hey,
Right.
what's the answer? Give me the answer. Give me the answer. Give me the answer. There is no answer right now, right?
Mhm.
All you can say is like it'll take some time. We'll see what they roll out. We'll see how the partnership evolves and benefits, right? I think there's definitely way more benefits around the fact that you've got a private equity firm investing in the value that they see within a brokerage team, right? I'm sorry, I say team, brokerage network. Like, there's a reason that you had, now this isn't us, but you have Rocket doing a lot of financing and other services, partner with a brokerage that had a direct to consumer play. You've got this private equity firm that has all this data, but there's no direct to consumer on how you provide value to said consumer. So I think it's a beautiful thing is like, look at what happened for what the valuation was with, um, with Redfin because of the value that Rocket can create through that channel. And I think in the partnership, because this entire company has been built on partnership, is looking at how does a private equity that has all these resources, all these products, all these partnerships can then really put like gas on an already humming business with no debt and really see what kind of disruption. And I see disruption in a positive way, like positive change for the industry, not
Yeah.
only for the consumers, but also our agent partners throughout our network. I think that's the cool part to see. Like
And
you're on the precipice of like massive change and disruption in the industry, and you're like, it's going to be a positive thing, not a negative thing.
that's like, I look at all the times. And again, I've said it before. I say it in trainings all the time. I say like, here's Gary, he's in his upper 60s now, still thriving, still incredibly passionate about the company that he built. He could easily have been retired and drinking pina coladas on a beach somewhere, right? That could have been his choice 2 decades ago, right? But he continues to pour capital, his own capital, right, and has into developing these tools to protect the agents and their consumers.
Yeah.
Few people are actually having that fight. So, like when I reach out to our agents or when I talk to agents across the aisle, I'm like, who's fighting for you? Look at the things that are happening. Look at okay, there might be some shiny trinkets and widgets that come your way, but truly ask yourself the question, is it for me or is it for them? And in this situation, I know the answer is for us.
I don't have any other way how to wrap up better than that. Like that is just like a great closing piece is that like more great things to come, more direction on the evolution of the industry. And I think keeping yourself educated about how these things benefit and how it plays out for consumers and how it enhances the agent relationship. And just to put a bow on what you said earlier was the unique barrier that agents have in their business is the direct to consumer relationship of trust, knowledge, and local expertise. And you put that on a platform that gets, call it jet fuel added to it because of what it can get you for data insights, for efficiencies and customer insights. I think it's a recipe for massive growth in the coming years.
Well, Joe, it was great to have you back this week.
Excited to be back. This is like times of like reaping and sow, and I think this is one of those times that like you gotta reap, and then now you gotta sow. And I think that's the piece right now is like building for the future, capitalizing on opportunities, and inside of an industry that has massive disruption, how can you be the defining force of the future?
Well, listen, for everybody listening at home, and whether you're with KW now or you're looking to be, and this stems some thought for questions for you, reach out to us. More than happy to have a conversation. But Joe, thanks for joining us and all of us to you on another episode of Entrepreneurial Impact. Have a great week, everybody.